My husband looked me straight in the eyes during the biggest family celebration of the year and called me the biggest disappointment of his life. The room became so quiet that I could hear glasses being placed on the tables. A few people forced nervous laughs because they didn't know how else to react. I stood there, unable to speak. I wanted the floor to open beneath me and make me disappear. But before he could say another word, his phone rang, and everything changed. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Brinley Mercer, and for 12 years I believed my marriage was built on love, trust, and sacrifice. I was wrong. That night was supposed to be a happy celebration. Our families had gathered at a beautiful country club to celebrate our wedding anniversary. The ballroom was filled with elegant decorations, expensive flowers, soft music, and smiling guests. Corwin had invited not only our relatives, but also his closest friends and several important business partners. Everyone was dressed for a special evening, and I honestly believed we would spend the night making happy memories. At first, everything seemed normal. People enjoyed dinner, shared stories, and raised glasses for a toast. Then Corwin stood up with a smile that I couldn't understand. He picked up his glass and thanked everyone for coming. I smiled back, expecting kind words. Instead, he looked directly at me. His smile disappeared. In a cold voice, he said I had never achieved anything on my own. He called me dependent. He said I had become the biggest disappointment of his life. Every word felt like another knife in my heart. I looked around the room and saw shocked faces. Some guests looked down at their plates. Others stared at me with pity. No one stopped him. No one defended me. I could barely breathe. My hands shook as I fought back tears. I didn't want anyone to see me cry, but I couldn't stop the pain. I quietly reached for my purse, planning to leave before I completely broke down. Just as I turned toward the exit, Corwin's phone began ringing. He looked annoyed at first, but the moment he answered, the color drained from his face. His confident expression vanished. His eyes widened as he listened without saying much. For the first time that night, he looked frightened. I had no idea who was calling or what had happened, but one thing became clear. The man who had just tried to destroy me in front of everyone was suddenly watching his own perfect world begin to fall apart. As I stood there watching the fear on Corwin's face, my mind drifted back through the years. It was impossible not to think about everything that had brought us to this moment. When we first got married, we had very little money, but we had big dreams. I had been accepted into graduate school and wanted to build my own career. Corwin had another plan. He wanted to start a consulting business, and he promised that once it became successful, I could go back to school. I believed him because I loved him. I turned down my acceptance and told myself it was only a short delay. That short delay slowly became 12 years. During that time, we moved across the country several times because of his work. Every move meant I had to leave another job and start over. I worked wherever I could. I was a receptionist, a bookstore clerk, an office assistant, and even worked late shifts at a grocery store. It didn't matter if I liked the job. I only cared that our bills were paid while Corwin focused on growing his company. I handled everything at home without complaining. I packed boxes, unpacked them, found new apartments, paid bills, cooked meals, cleaned the house, and made sure life stayed organized. Whenever Corwin felt stressed, I encouraged him and reminded him not to give up. I celebrated every small success as if it were my own. As the business grew, Corwin slowly changed. He became less patient and more critical. Nothing I did seemed good enough anymore. If dinner was late, he complained. If the house wasn't perfect, he pointed it out. If I talked about returning to school, he would say it wasn't the right time. He always had another reason for me to wait. At family gatherings, everyone admired him. They praised his success and spoke proudly about his company. They called him hardworking and brilliant. When they looked at me, they acted as if I had simply been lucky to marry him. Few people asked about my dreams or the life I had left behind. I smiled through those conversations because I didn't want to create problems. I kept telling myself that marriage meant supporting each other. I believed my sacrifices would matter someday. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I ignored. I kept hoping the kind man I married would come back. Instead, the distance between us grew a little more every year, and I was too busy protecting our marriage to notice that I was slowly losing myself. Over time, our home stopped feeling peaceful. It became a place where I carefully thought about every word before speaking. Corwin always found something to complain about. If I bought a new sweater, he asked why I wasted money. If I wore an old outfit, he said I looked careless and embarrassed him. No matter what I did, it was never enough. I started questioning myself instead of questioning him. I wondered if I really was the problem. He also began making decisions without asking for my opinion. He planned vacations, changed schedules, and even accepted long business trips without telling me until the last minute. When I asked simple questions, he acted as if I was bothering him. He would say I worried too much or that I didn't understand how important his work was. After hearing those words so many times, I stopped asking. I noticed other changes that were harder to ignore. His phone was always with him. He never left it on the kitchen counter anymore. If it rang while we were together, he would walk into another room before answering. Sometimes he stepped outside even when it was raining. When he came back, he acted like nothing had happened. If I asked who had called, he gave short answers that never explained anything. His business trips also became more frequent. Some lasted only one night, while others stretched into several days. The schedules often changed without warning. I packed his suitcase, wished him safe travels, and stayed home alone. He rarely called unless I contacted him first. Even then, the conversations were rushed. He always sounded distracted, as if he couldn't wait to hang up. Money became another subject he avoided. For years we had shared every financial decision, but suddenly that changed. Bills arrived that I wasn't allowed to see. Bank statements disappeared before I could organize them. When I offered to help with paperwork, he quickly refused. He told me I didn't need to worry because he was handling everything. Something about his voice made me uneasy, but I pushed those feelings aside. I kept telling myself that successful businesses were complicated, and maybe I simply didn't understand. Deep inside, however, a quiet fear continued to grow. I felt it every time he left the room to answer another phone call. I felt it every time another trip appeared on his calendar. I knew our marriage was slipping away, but I wasn't ready to accept it. I believed that if I loved him enough, listened more, and argued less, things would somehow return to the way they used to be. I held on to that hope because I wasn't ready to face the truth that something much bigger was happening right in front of me. The entire room watched Corwin as he slowly lowered his phone from his ear. For a few seconds, he stood completely still. The man who had been speaking with so much confidence only moments before now looked confused and nervous. One of his business partners walked toward him and quietly asked if everything was all right. Corwin forced a weak smile and said it was only a small problem that would be fixed quickly. His voice sounded different. It no longer carried the confidence everyone was used to hearing. Instead of returning to the head table, he walked toward the hallway outside the ballroom. Something inside me told me not to leave yet. I stayed near the entrance, trying to calm myself. From where I stood, I could hear parts of his conversation. He kept his voice low, but a few words reached me clearly. I heard someone mention frozen company accounts. Then I heard another voice through the phone speaking loudly enough that even Corwin couldn't hide it. They were asking about missing company funds. A moment later, I heard the words internal investigation. My heart started beating faster. Corwin kept saying there had to be some mistake. He insisted he could explain everything, but whoever was on the other end didn't seem interested in excuses. He rubbed his forehead and paced back and forth while trying to stay calm. Inside the ballroom, people had started noticing how long he had been gone. Conversations became quieter. Guests looked toward the hallway, wondering what had happened. A few of his coworkers stepped outside to check on him, but he waved them away and continued talking. Even from a distance, everyone could see that something was very wrong. After several long minutes, Corwin walked back into the room. His face was pale, and he avoided making eye contact with anyone. He tried to continue the evening as if nothing had happened, but the mood had completely changed. Nobody laughed anymore. The music still played, but it felt strange against the heavy silence in the room. One guest whispered something to another, and soon small conversations started spreading across the tables. People were trying to guess what had happened. Corwin picked up his glass again, but his hand shook so badly that he quickly set it back down. For the first time since I had known him, he looked like a man who had lost control. I didn't know the full truth yet, but I knew this wasn't a simple business problem. Whatever had happened during that phone call was serious enough to erase his confidence in just a few minutes. As I watched him struggle to hide his fear, I couldn't stop wondering if this was only the beginning of something much bigger that was about to come crashing into both of our lives. We drove home in complete silence. Corwin barely looked at me. He went straight to his home office and locked the door behind him. I sat alone in the living room, trying to understand everything that had happened. After nearly an hour, he rushed out with a briefcase, said he had an urgent meeting, and walked out without waiting for a reply. The house became quiet again. As I cleaned up a few things, I noticed that the office door had not fully closed. It was slightly open. I had never gone through his private papers before because I believed every marriage needed trust. That night felt different. Something inside me told me I deserved answers. I stepped into the office and saw papers scattered across his desk, as if he had left in a hurry. I wasn't looking for secrets, but one document immediately caught my attention. It had both of our names on it. I picked it up and started reading. My hands began shaking. It showed that money had been moved from our shared accounts into accounts that only Corwin controlled. There were several transfers made over many months. The amounts were large enough to change our entire future. I searched through the other folders and found more documents. There were records of investment accounts I had never heard about and property papers connected only to his name. Every page made one thing clear. He had been quietly moving our money while pretending everything was normal. Then I found a folder marked confidential. Inside was a draft of divorce papers. They were not signed yet, but everything had already been prepared. The papers were dated weeks before our anniversary. My heart sank. He had planned to leave me long before that dinner. As I kept looking, an envelope slipped onto the floor. Several printed emails fell out. They were between Corwin and one of his business associates, a woman named Vanessa. At first they sounded friendly, but the messages quickly became personal. They talked about weekends together, private trips, and a future after his marriage ended. It was clear this relationship had been going on for a long time. I sat down because I could no longer stand. The pain was almost too much to carry. Suddenly everything made sense. His cold behavior, the secrets, the criticism, and the public humiliation were all connected. He wanted me to feel worthless. If I believed I had nothing, maybe I would accept whatever he gave me when the divorce came. He thought I would walk away without asking questions. He thought I would be too broken to fight back. I carefully placed every document exactly where I had found it before leaving the office. I wiped away my tears and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. For the first time in many years, I stopped asking what I had done wrong. Instead, I asked myself a different question. How was I going to make sure he never got away with this? That night I made a promise to myself. I would not cry in front of Corwin again, and I would not let him know what I had discovered. If he believed I knew nothing, he would keep making mistakes. I decided that staying calm would be my greatest advantage. The next morning, I acted as if everything was normal. I made breakfast, spoke politely, and watched him leave for work without asking a single question. As soon as his car disappeared, I started making plans. I searched for an experienced family law attorney in a nearby town where nobody knew us. I didn't want anyone connected to Corwin's business hearing about my visit. A few days later, I met with the attorney in a small office. I carried copies of every document I had quietly collected. She listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me and said I had done the right thing by coming before confronting my husband. She explained that hiding money during a marriage could become very important in court if it was properly documented. She also suggested hiring a forensic accountant who could trace where the missing money had gone. I followed her advice. The accountant examined every bank record, property document, contract, and financial statement I had. He showed me that the transfers were much larger than I first realized. Money had been moved through different accounts to make it harder to follow. He carefully organized everything into detailed reports that could later be used as evidence. Over the next few weeks, I became more careful than ever. Whenever Corwin left the house, I checked for new paperwork and copied only what was necessary. I kept everything in a safe place outside our home. I also saved important emails and business records whenever I legally had access to them. Every piece of information helped build a clearer picture of what had really been happening. For the first time in years, I stopped making decisions based on what was best for Corwin. I started thinking about my own future. I opened a separate bank account in my own name. I updated my resume and looked into returning to school after everything was over. Each small step made me feel stronger. The fear that had controlled me for so long slowly began to disappear. I no longer saw myself as the woman who had been embarrassed at a dinner party. I saw someone preparing for a new beginning. Corwin had no idea how much had changed. He continued living his life, believing I was still the same quiet wife who would accept whatever happened. He smiled when he wanted, acted distant when it suited him, and never noticed the confidence growing inside me. While he was busy protecting himself, I was quietly building the case that could expose every lie he had spent months trying to hide. I wasn't looking for revenge driven by anger anymore. I was preparing for justice, and I was determined to face whatever came next without fear. Things began to change quickly after that. Corwin started coming home later than usual, and his face always looked tense. He was constantly on the phone, speaking in short, sharp sentences before pacing around the house. I could tell something serious was happening in his world, even though he never explained anything to me. The calm confidence he used to carry was gone. Instead, he looked like someone trying to hold together something that was already breaking apart. One evening, I noticed him sitting alone in his office with his head in his hands. Papers were spread across his desk, and his laptop screen stayed open for hours. He barely ate dinner and barely spoke. The house felt different, like a heavy silence had replaced everything familiar. Soon after, I began noticing unfamiliar people arriving at his office building. He stopped talking about meetings or new deals. Instead, he grew defensive whenever his phone rang. He would step outside or move into another room, but I could still hear the frustration in his voice. The confident world he had built seemed to be shrinking around him. A few days later, I overheard him on a call arguing with someone he used to call a close partner. The conversation sounded tense. The trust he once had with others appeared to be disappearing. I also noticed that he stopped mentioning certain business names altogether, as if avoiding them would make the problem go away. At home, he tried to act normal when others were around, but I could see through it. His smile didn't last long, and his words felt forced. One night, he asked me to attend a small business gathering with him. He said it would show support and help calm things down. His tone was different, almost careful, like he was trying to convince me rather than ask. I looked at him and calmly said no. I told him I wasn't comfortable being part of anything related to his work. That answer surprised him. He tried again later, saying it would be good for both of us to appear united. I refused again. This time I didn't explain myself. I simply walked away. After that, he became more distant. He stopped trying to involve me in his problems and instead focused entirely on controlling the situation around him. I could see him losing influence little by little. People who once respected him began treating him differently. Calls were shorter. Meetings were canceled. Invitations stopped coming. He didn't say it out loud, but I knew he felt it. One evening, I saw him staring at an old photo of us on the shelf. For a moment, he looked unsure of everything around him. But I no longer felt the need to step in or comfort him. I stayed quiet and watched as the life he carefully built started slipping away from his control, piece by piece. The courtroom felt cold and serious the first time I walked in. I kept my face calm even though my heart was racing. Corwin sat on the other side with his lawyer, acting confident at first, like he still believed he could control everything. But that didn't last long. My attorney stood up and began presenting the case step by step. She spoke clearly and firmly, showing records, reports, and documents that had been carefully organized. Each page revealed a different part of the truth. Bank transfers, hidden accounts, and financial movements were explained in detail. The numbers were not small mistakes. They showed a pattern that could not be ignored. The judge listened closely, asking questions while going through the evidence. Corwin's expression slowly changed as more information came out. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently, but there was no way to stop what was already being shown. When his attorney tried to defend him, the explanations sounded weak and unclear. Nothing matched the records presented in front of the court. At one point, Corwin tried to speak directly, insisting that everything was misunderstood and that I had no idea how business worked. My lawyer calmly responded, pointing out inconsistencies in his statements. The room stayed quiet as the truth became harder for him to hide. I sat still, watching everything unfold without saying a word. I didn't need to argue. The facts were already speaking for themselves. As the hearing continued, even more details came out about how finances had been handled during the marriage. The judge reviewed everything carefully, taking notes without interruption. There was no emotion on his face, only focus. After several sessions, the final decision was announced. The court recognized the financial actions that had taken place and ruled in my favor in a fair and structured way. Assets were divided based on what had been proven, and adjustments were made to correct what had been hidden. Corwin's reaction was quiet. He didn't speak at first. The confidence he once carried was completely gone. He looked down at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. The man who used to command attention in every space now seemed small and uncertain. When we left the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't excitement or anger. It was relief. Everything that had been buried under silence and confusion had finally been brought into the open. I didn't look back at him as I stepped outside. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was no longer living in someone else's shadow. I was simply moving forward, one step at a time, into a life that was finally mine again. After everything settled, life slowly began to feel different. The days were no longer filled with tension or uncertainty. I started waking up without that heavy feeling in my chest. For a long time, I had lived in a way that revolved around someone else's mood, needs, and approval. Now I was learning how to live for myself again. I enrolled in classes at a local college, something I had once dreamed about but kept delaying for years. Walking into the classroom on the first day felt strange, but also exciting. I was older than most students, but I didn't feel out of place. I felt ready. I focused on subjects that interested me and slowly started building confidence in my abilities. Learning something new gave me a sense of purpose I had not felt in a long time. Outside of school, I began working in a job that allowed me to grow instead of just survive. It wasn't about earning money anymore. It was about rebuilding my identity. I met people who didn't know my past and didn't judge me based on it. That alone felt freeing. I also reconnected with family members I had grown distant from over the years. Some of those relationships had faded because I was too busy trying to keep my marriage stable. Now, I reached out without hesitation. To my surprise, many of them responded with kindness and support. Simple conversations, shared meals, and laughter slowly brought warmth back into my life. There were still moments when memories from the past came back unexpectedly. Sometimes I would remember things said to me or situations I had accepted without question. But those memories no longer controlled me. Instead of feeling broken, I began to see how much I had endured and survived. The pain didn't disappear completely, but it changed. It became something I carried as a reminder of how far I had come. I stopped measuring my worth by how others treated me or what they said about me. For so long, I had believed I needed to prove myself to deserve respect or love. That belief slowly faded. I realized I didn't need approval to feel complete. Peace started showing up in small ways. Quiet mornings, simple routines, and the ability to make decisions without fear all became part of my life again. I didn't rush anything. I let things grow naturally. Each step forward felt steady, even if it was small. For the first time in years, I felt like I was not just surviving each day, but actually living it. The future no longer felt like something I was afraid of. It felt open, and for the first time, it felt like it truly belonged to me. Years passed faster than I expected. Life had a way of moving forward even when memories stayed behind. One afternoon, I was walking through a quiet part of the city when I saw someone familiar standing outside a small cafe. It took me a moment to recognize him. Corwin looked different now. The sharp confidence he once carried was gone. His clothes were simple, his posture low, and his expression tired. For a few seconds, he didn't notice me. When our eyes finally met, there was a pause that felt heavy with everything unsaid. He seemed unsure at first, like he wasn't certain if he should speak. Then he slowly walked closer. His voice was quieter than I remembered when he finally said my name. He looked down and admitted that he had made serious mistakes. He said he had destroyed important parts of his life through pride and poor choices. There was no anger in his tone, only regret. He spoke about how things had fallen apart and how he finally understood the damage he had caused. I listened without interrupting. I didn't feel the need to defend myself or reopen old wounds. Those chapters of my life no longer held power over me. When he finished speaking, there was silence between us. He waited, hoping for a reaction, maybe even forgiveness. I looked at him calmly and told him I accepted what he had said. My words were simple, without emotion or anger. I didn't owe him anything more than that. There was nothing left for me in the past. I wished him well in a neutral way and stepped back. As I turned to leave, I felt no sadness or bitterness. What I felt instead was peace. I realized in that moment that revenge had never been about watching someone lose everything. It had been about reclaiming my own life and building something stronger out of what was broken. He had to live with the consequences of his actions, but I no longer had to carry them. Walking away, I understood something important. True strength does not come from hurting someone who hurt you. It comes from choosing yourself after everything has been taken from you emotionally. It comes from standing again when you were pushed down and deciding that your future will not be shaped by someone else's betrayal. My life was no longer defined by what happened in the past. It was defined by how I chose to move forward, with respect for myself, patience for my healing, and a quiet confidence that no one could take away again.